Good morning and welcome to Local Law 97, what your board must know about benchmarking, saving on energy, and avoiding penalties, a cooperator events webinar presented by the Condo Group. Today, we're delighted to welcome our expert speakers, Jimmy Carcietta and Neil Mitra. Jimmy is the founder and CEO of the Condo Group, a leading sustainability and energy consulting firm that specializes in helping organizations achieve their sustainability goals. With over 35 years of experience in the field, he's established himself as a leading expert in green building and sustainability practices. Neil is Codocon's COO and a building energy efficiency engineer with over 6 years of experience in the sustainable building industry. Neil leads the operations department at Codocon, directly supporting LEED certifications, energy and carbon audits, building energy modeling, benchmarking, and commissioning projects in New York City and Long Island. Our moderator today is Yale Robbins, president of Yale Robbins Productions and Cooperator Events. Contact information for today's panelists can be found by clicking the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Otherwise, the chat feature will be disabled for the duration of the discussion. To submit a question to the panel, please use the Q&A button. While we may not be able to address every question submitted, we'll do our best to cover as many as possible in the time we have. You're welcome to include your name and location in your question or to remain anonymous. Be advised that the views and opinions expressed in today's discussion are those of the panelists alone and do not necessarily reflect those of Cooperator Events or its parent company, Yale Robbins Productions. All information, content, and materials presented in this webinar are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to constitute formal legal or financial advice. Again, thank you all for joining us this morning. We have a lot to cover, so let's turn the discussion over to our panelists and moderator.
Welcome, Jimmy. I'm glad you could be with us this morning. And welcome, Neil.
Good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
And welcome to our audience. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Jimmy, give us a little bit of background history on the New York City sustainability local laws that preceded and set the stage for Local Law 97.
Okay, hey, so good morning, everybody. I'm going to take us through a timeline and a journey that will demonstrate here, as you can see on the screen, the evolution of New York City sustainability laws. So feel free, take a quick picture with your phone. If you have any questions, we'll refer back to it. But a little over a decade ago, there were two laws that came into existence, Local Law 84 and Local Law 87. And both of them had a plateau of 50,000 square feet. And a few years later, the city decided to say, you know what? All buildings now that are 25,000 square feet are going to have to now comply to similarly the earlier laws that stated. So as you can see, these laws are starting to become more stringent. Now, when the first two laws came out, they had a plateau of 50,000 square feet, as I said, and Local Law 84 is about annual benchmarking and water consumption, right? And it's due May 1st every year. So relatively soon, you have a filing that's coming up. Local Law 87, on the other hand, is due every 10 years. And what determines that is the last digit of your block number. So Local Law 87 is also known as an energy audit and retro commissioning. It's basically, Local Law 87 creates deficiency lists. And, you know, these are things that you must fix. And hopefully you get a good understanding of how efficient your building is working. So Local Law 133 now, when that went into effect, it's similar to Local 84, it's just an annual benchmarking. And the city at that point didn't demand a service similar to Local Law 87 for buildings that were under the 50,000 square foot plateau. But let's take us to 2019. 2019, we're back in the 90s. And what our main objective today is to give you an understanding about Local Law 97, but there are other similar laws that came out. That was part of that Climate Mobilization Act. And two important laws that everyone is being focused on, Local Law 95, which is your energy grade. We're going to be covering that a little bit later in the journey and in the presentation. And once again, questions. If you guys have immediate questions, you could just feel free to fire them in at a right time. So energy grades, that's due. It's required to be posted between October 1st and October 30th. Then again, every single year. So that's something that's required. Let's now take us into local law 97, this carbon tax law, if you will, and it's basically 8.5 months away. Reason being, the first filing is May 1st, 2025. However, it's of the prior year, similar to the benchmarking laws. So all our 2024 data is what's going to go in. Now, kind of a little bit of layman's terms here, local law 97. Let's assume that you have a 10-story building, but you're consuming the energy of a 15-story building. Not only are you paying for that wasted energy, you're now going to be paying an emissions tax and wasted energy and wasted stuff. So that's basically a quick summary of where we are today.
So, in general, what's the goal of Local Law 97?
The goal of Local Law 97 is to help you understand that there's no more advantage of consuming energy, burning unnecessarily energy, because you're going to be paying a fine and you're going to be paying a violation. And it's kind of unfair to say that's just the way that the city is going to be generating money. And it's becoming more and more stringent, and the requirements are, just getting extremely tough. And they're very volatile, by the way.
If I could also add, Yale, the goal, according to the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, the goal of the 97 is to reduce citywide building emissions by 80% by 2050. Buildings on a whole in New York City are 40% of emissions. And the whole idea of the 97 is to target building sectors in particular. 97 basically helps achieve that 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2050. And in doing so, the first step is 40% reduction by 2030. Hence the limits and how they change over the years. I'm sure we're going to talk about that later.
What are the main consumers of energy in the buildings that can be impacted by actions that the building managers or owners can take?
Go ahead, Neil, take that one.
The main equipment, did you say, Ian?
Yeah, well, whatever it is that is consuming more energy than the
Correct. So yeah, so you said it actually. It's the major energy consuming equipment. And on a large, when we look at buildings, we look at a few, you break it down into 4 key factors. The HVAC, how you heat, ventilate, and air condition the space. Equipment that serve HVAC, fans, VFDs, rooftop units, those are major equipments. Then the envelope, we also like to assess. Those are not equipment, but how stable, how efficient your envelope is also determines how efficient you are heating and cooling the space if there's waste energy. The third is the lighting. It's one of the low-hanging fruit when the 97 started. It's really a no-brainer. LED lighting is the way to go. If you don't have those, there are also laws that require those. So over the next few years, that is going to be the norm. The fourth are plug loads. So those are minimal in like residential buildings, but depending on different applications, if it's an office with a data center, if it's laundromats, things like that, those start to get more attention. So we, in general, like to break it down into those 4. When we look at a building, it's very building specific, like Jimmy likes to say, just like people, buildings are different. And that's what we see usually when we go into buildings.
So with respect to HVAC, what kind of changes can a building make to impact the overall emission of that building?
Neil, let me handle this. So yeah, what's important is, as Neil has kind of broken down the conditions and how we evaluate buildings, I want to jump over for a second, because most of this data I want to explain to the people, and the message I need to deliver is that We have been reporting this information, and all our answers are at our fingertips. We just don't know how to go get it and take advantage of it. And if we could put up slide 2 right now, it's going to demonstrate the local law 97 GHG mitigation roadmap. So folks, please take a look at this. I'm sure everyone here is at least in a building that is 25,000 square feet and greater. So you might not be required for every law, but from your benchmarking, from your energy audits and retro commissionings, from any type of evaluation you do, those answers and the equipment are all in there. You could take that slide down now. So it really starts with the benchmarking, and more importantly, accurate benchmarking. So more importantly than changing any piece of equipment, investing any type of dollars until you have a solid understanding of how has my building been performing? What have I submitted to the city? To be honest with you, we deal with a lot of buildings and they're not over the limit. They might go on to one of the city websites and they might take a look. And what I don't want us to do, and I'm okay with dealing with all the answers and questions, I want people to first understand this roadmap, the evolution, the data, and all of this stuff. And buildings are different. So what determines how your building is going to be efficient is how is it structured? How is my building built? And that leads us up to start to utilize the tools, the benchmarking tools. Everyone that's done a local law 87, which is an energy audit and retro commissioning, make, model, and serial number of your equipment and how's it performing. Get into those tools, read the reports. They're very valuable. Have you reviewed them? Have you taken care of deficiencies? In those reports, the city doesn't make you change your boiler, but it might be a good ECM, energy conservation measure. So utilizing those tools and looking at these local laws as an investment, people, don't look at them as an expense. You have to spend the money anyway. Don't just spend your money to say, well, I want to avoid $2,000 fine. Don't do that. That's a bad thing. Sorry to kind of, I wanted to show and demonstrate that there are tools that they have. So hopefully at the end of this meeting, everyone logs into their Energy Star portfolio manager and see how their building actually is performing, and if it's done accurately.
So where would someone log into their Energy Star performance manager?
Okay, so some people might do it internally. Some people might have a consultant. I think that this is kind of a good time to bring us into another slide. Neil is going to take us through a journey about energy grades and how Energy Star. Go ahead, Neil.
Right. Yeah. So pretty basic. I'm sure we all know about the benchmarking. We've at least heard of it. It's one of the forebearers of the sustainability laws. It's one of the first laws. It is the first law that ever was there for buildings. The benchmarking is really reporting your annual energy use and water consumption every year. When you do that, and you do this on the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. What this is basically an online portal developed by the Department of Energy. It's free to use. It's pretty self-explanatory. You just log on, you create your account, you create a profile of the building.
What is the URL for that?
I can actually share it on the chat here, but if you just Google Energy Star Portfolio Manager, the first link that comes up is the one, Energy Star Portfolio, and it should have a .gov website. That's how you know it's the original. So it's portfolio manager.energystar.gov.
And even if you're using a consultant, you should have the rights to look into this information. It's very important, people.
Right. So that's where all the magic happens. That's where you benchmark a building, and that's through which you file it to the city.
So what do these grades mean?
So yes, so your benchmarking score, one of the things you receive when you benchmark your building is the benchmarking score. The benchmarking score is a 1 to 100 score. What it means is basically when we build a building profile, we put in certain characteristics. It's a computer simulation where we're trying to build the building on a computer, and we put utilities into it. When we do the benchmarking, you are supposed to report your whole building utility consumption. We do that directly through utilities. So Con Edison, National Grid, DEP. Again, if you used fuel oil for your boilers, those are, again, deliveries that you would manually have to enter onto the portfolio manager. So all of these are important to make sure you have an accurate representation of your building. Once you do, you receive that 1 to 100 score. That 1 to 100 score is a representation of how your building fares when compared to other similar buildings. So if you're a 50, that's a median. If you're a 75, you are up there in the top 25% percentile. That's all that a score means, and based on what your score is, you get a grade. So if your score is 85 to 100, you're an A. If you're 70 to an 84, you're a B. If you're 55 to a 69, you're a C. If you're anywhere below 55, you're a D, D for David. And if you did not benchmark your building by 1st of May every year, you receive an F for failure. I also want to add, there are certain
Neil, do you have to benchmark every year?
Yes, you have to benchmark your building's annual energy use and water consumption every year and file the report by May 1st. And when you do this, you're essentially reporting your last calendar year's consumption. So when we do this year, which we're actually starting to do for our clients, we're essentially reporting 2022 consumption, January through December 2022 to the city. Based on this, when you get the score, October later this year, you get the grade corresponding to the score, which is when 1st of October, you log on to the DOB portal, you remove the grade that you had from last year, and you put up this fresh grade. This grade stays again October to October, which is again, so that's the way the grade cycle happens. The benchmarking cycle happens May to May. So that's really what the grade means. A very important factor is the grade does not directly tell you what your emissions are.
So we have a question for an audience member, which I think is germane here. If a building has an A grade after benchmarking, do they need to even worry about local law 97? I guess the point is, what's the relationship between the grades and compliance with local law 97?
So first, yeah.
Neil, let me just handle this one second, and then you could. Okay, so here's what's really important. Is that benchmark accurate? Neil mentioned a couple of things. All these sources of energy. Let's just hypothetically say the individual, and please don't take this personal, anyone, the individual that benchmarked that building forgot to add the oil, all the oil bills, and they added the water and they added some gas bills. And now all of a sudden the building's an A. And the building has an Energy Star score of 99. You know, that's a real special building. I'm going to be honest with you. You know, we benchmark thousands of buildings, and things like that don't. So first and foremost, I don't want to say any insult in this. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that your building isn't accurate, and your benchmarking is important to the characteristics of the building. And then Neil's going to take it away, and Neil will talk about how that really, and go ahead, Neil.
So yes, of course, make sure you're doing an accurate benchmarking.
Neil, let me ask one question, because I think we should get back to local law 97 and understand a little bit more about what compliance means. And then maybe we can relate it to the benchmarking, or how the benchmarking is useful in that process. Sure. So how does a building demonstrate compliance with local law 97? What type of compliance reporting is required by the city? And how is it an annual? I believe it's an annual process. So if you could talk a little bit about what compliance means and what the goals are for buildings. How are they set? Where do you find out what you're trying to achieve?
Go ahead, Neil.
So yes, every year is when you file it, 2025 onwards. The exact filing protocol, what it will involve, what it means to file a 97 report, we still do not know that yet, because this law is still new. Yes, the city is still yet to release more law, more rules. The last rules that came out were finally finalized early this year, which had changes in emission threshold for certain property types. But we still have no information on how to file it. However, they have released information on what to expect. We can expect that there are existing mechanisms in place, like the portfolio manager for the benchmarking. For people who are familiar with the 87, they would know that there is another portal where you file the 87. It's called the energy asset tool. So the idea is to use these existing infrastructures, these existing systems to help file a report. Now, what we mean by filing a report is basically making sure and accounting for your overall building's carbon emissions. So just like the benchmarking, you report your annual energy use and water consumption every year. The 97, we're just going to be reporting your last year's building emissions. However, this needs to be stamped and certified by a registered design professional. These are usually professional engineers, PEs, or registered architects, RAs. More often than not, they're PEs because of the area of expertise needed for such audits. But it's pretty simple. The exact laws, the reporting tool, the software is yet to be determined, but we know what it will include. It will include calculation of your previous year's emissions, determination if you are below the threshold, if you're above the threshold, and filing that report with the city based on the difference. If you're above, the city hands you a violation. And this same process happens every year, moving onwards, 2025 onwards.
Where does a building owner find out what that threshold is for their particular size and type of property?
So the law, however, breaking it down for non-technical audiences, there are resources available online. Of course, you can always reach out to us. You can reach out to your consultants who did your benchmarking. But there are NYC Sustainable website. If you Google NYC Sustainability, they do break it down property type wise. However, I would recommend reaching out to your benchmarking provider, because according to the recent change, before retail buildings, for example, were one block. But now they break it down there are different limits for enclosed malls, which are also retail buildings, but there are different limits also for individual retail stores, and then different limits for strip malls. Similarly for office, now they break it down into banking office, financial office, medical offices. They're also emphasizing on trying to, when you benchmark, trying to account for each and every property use type inside the building. So even if 10% of the building is retail, you have a retail on the ground floor and the rest of the building is residential, you want to make sure when you benchmark, you're capturing that 10% as a retail. So when you later go and calculate your emissions, it will be prorated on the part that is retail, because that has a different threshold, and the part that is residential, because that has a different threshold.
So how do you recommend a building, a co-op or a condo building, go about the process of who do they hire? What stage do they hire who? And how do they start to make a scope of work that's required in order to get them to, it sounds to me like the goals are set and you need to get there and you need to get under those goals. So who do you hire to determine where you are and determine what you have to do?
Well, you hire energy engineers, energy experts like us. Usually it should start, simply to give co-ops and condo owners like a idea where to start. Your benchmarking provider, you want to start with understanding your benchmarking results, because once you understand where you are today, what your emissions were last year, once you understand what your emissions are supposed to be under in 2024, that's when you can start to dive into what kind of investments and what kind of changes you would have to make to stay under that limit. So
Hey, Neil, actually, the people that are over the 50,000 square foot plateau that have performed their local law 87s, as we were saying, they have the data and they have the information.
Correct. So for
all those reports, start to open up those tools. Get on the phone with the company, because you need a third-party verifier that did your local law 87, and say, send me that report. Don't just throw it in the file in the garbage, as I was saying earlier, Yale, So we've been performing. I know we keep going back to the benchmarking, but the benchmarking is what actually generates the EUI, the energy use intensity. And that's what the city has created, all these plateaus. So as
Well,
Neil
maybe you
said,
could explain that to the audience a bit. What is EUI? How is that used in this process?
go ahead, buddy.
So your EUI is your energy utilization index or energy use intensity. It's really not your normalized consumption of energy per square feet. If say for example, you use these many kilowatt hours of electricity, these many therms of gas or gallons of oil, all of that can be converted into a source of energy, a common source of energy. Usually it's kBTUs. And you break that by square feet, you get your intensity, you get how much on average energy your building is using per square feet. That tells you if you're above the median, if you're below the median. And this was for energy. Similarly, we do this for carbon, where instead of energy measure, it's more in carbon dioxide. So it's either metric tons, which is what the law is written in. It could also be in kilograms, but basically metric tons of equivalent carbon dioxide per square feet is your GHG. Greenhouse gas is GHG, and EUI is your energy use index intensity. So just to be a little less technical, it's really the amount of carbon dioxide your building is responsible for emitting on a per square feet basis.
And the city has set limits that you must go under if you want to avoid fines for a building of your size and your use type.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes, and that's the most interesting thing, because the 97 does not really tell you what to do, because earlier when you asked that question, in terms of HVAC, what does the 97 ask you? It does not, because it tells you what you need to be under, and it pretty much leaves it open to you as a building owner or as a property manager or as a consultant to pretty much have full reign of what you can do to bring your building under that threshold. Because a lot of times it might not be the HVAC, it might be the 25-year-old windows, single pane windows that need to be replaced. A lot of times it could be the lack of a BMS system of or lack of control of heat, like tenants are unable to control how much heat they want. So as a result, some people open windows. That we see is a big issue in some residential facilities. So that, again, we have to tackle building by building on a case by case. Some building, again, we have to look into infrastructure. Some buildings are built a certain way where we might not be able to suggest bigger technology like heat pumps, because we might face hindrances when it comes to facing equipment inside the building. Some other buildings are perfect for that. So all of that figures into the equation. The best place to start is reviewing your reports. If not, if you don't have them, getting engineers on site, having conversations with your board. If you already have projects that you want to dive into, like example, you have a 25-plus-year-old boiler, things that you may have budgeted for, or things that you're starting off changing or upgrading. That is something you could even have a conversation with your consultant. But it all starts with a site visit and evaluation of your existing equipment.
So if you get to compliance by 2024, do the standards change every year that you have to continue to improve the efficiency of your building?
Yes, so there are 5 brackets, if you can say, because the whole idea of reducing emissions by 80% by 2050, it has to be achieved in steps. So the first 5-year period is 2024 through 2029, where every year they have to be under that limit. For residential buildings, we're just going to take that as an example for this exercise. Say they have to be 6.75 kilograms of carbon dioxide per square feet every year for that first bracket from 2024, 2025, 6, 7, 8, 9. That threshold lowers for 2030 through 2034, which is the second bracket. The third bracket is 2035 through 2039, where it lowers even further. The fourth bracket is the biggest bracket, a 10-year bracket, 2040 through 2049, which is where you have all buildings basically go to a 1 point something, which is a really, really low emission intensity.
Jimmy, you're shaking your head, Jimmy. Is
It's
it
impossible, because
that's the question. Is it possible?
yeah, no, it's not.
it's a theory.
You know, it's a theory, and I'm not here to pop everybody's balloon, you know, but it's really it's challenging. You know, the first tranche, as Neil was saying, a 6.75. The second tranche drops to a 3.39. What three? So
3.35, yeah.
3.35. So and no, that this was the latest. Back in October, there was a lot of noise and a lot of chatter going on.
You know, Jimmy, these numbers make sense to you, but most of the people listening to this have no idea what 3.39 represents.
Okay, it's that unit of measurement, as we were kind of talking earlier about that EUI, that energy use. So just think of it this way in layman's terms. All the energy that comes into your building, if it was a calculation divided by the square foot, because the penalty is really per square foot, right? So we have a slide. Could we just pull up slide 4 for a moment here? And it'll give folks an example. Neil, you want to, you could take them through it. Go ahead, Neil.
Neil, this is a building that is both residential and commercial in the lower floors, I believe, right?
Yes. Okay.
It's a large building. It's a large building. I don't want to frighten everybody with that $1,264,000 fine at the bottom there.
Yeah, but if it was 10%, let's assume your building was 100,000 square foot, just 10% of that number. Let's figure the fine at being 23,000. Who still wants to pay 23,000? You know, if you have 23 units, it's $1,000 for everyone every year. That might not sound that bad, but what's going to wind up happening? How is this? All of these measures are going to impact the values of our properties and our asset values. But Neil, just give him a quick walkthrough here. So
right, yeah, and before I get into this, Yale, I know those numbers do not mean anything to you guys, but on average, say a residential building, if you were a 50, your greenhouse gas would be somewhere around a 5 right now.
So if you got a C grade, your greenhouse gas would be around the 5 at this point?
If it should be. Again, this differs on different classes of buildings. You know, if it's a sub 50,000 square feet building, if it's a above 100,000 square feet building, because ranges change and buildings are put into groups differently. But just for a usual understanding, you know, for an approximate, yes, C would be around a 5, and you're just below that 6.75. You're approaching it. You're already above the 2030 limit, which was 3.35. So yes. Also, to answer that previous question, that A, which also ties into that answer, is if you have an A, it is a general indicator that you are a better performing building, but you would also want to look into your consumption in order to determine your emissions, because that's the only way you get your emissions, and not from the grade.
Yeah, what's important, we don't want people to leave this session knowing that the energy grade has 0 correlation to local law 97 and the emissions, 0. Local law 97 and the emissions and this so-called emission tax that we're going to be paying for, think of it as combustion. Combustion creates emissions. So if I'm in you could take that image down. If you're in an apartment building, if we're in an apartment building and we are using natural gas to create heat, hot water, right throughout our building, right in our space heating. Now, that natural gas comes from a power plant. So it's what's called a site. The site is the actual location and the source. So the source of energy, where it comes from, and these factors and emissions. So in a sense, when you're burning emissions here, you're actually paying for that source of energy where it came from. And that's kind of what local law 97 is about, right? So by lowering consumption, you're lowering consumption and you're lowering emission. And the only way to lower your emission is to reduce your consumption.
So getting back to my question of how do you go about planning for and implementing a compliance plan, what are the people that you have to involve in this process from the beginning of it to the actual implementation?
All right. So let me start, Neil, and then I want you to finish. So for the individuals that are in buildings that are 50,000 square feet and over, go find out about your benchmarking, find out about your local law 87, that energy audit, put all that information together, and then start to value it. Look for someone that could help you understand that information, and maybe the people that you have now will and can, to start to make a determination on what you need. The people that are under that 50,000 square foot plateau, they really need to perform an exercise that is similar to that local law 97. It's a little bit more economical because we don't need, as professionals, to sign off and stamp and seal something and submit it to the city. It's something that doesn't have to get submitted. So really understanding envelope, lighting, and HVAC of your building. So those are good roadmaps to start, and then Neil will take us through a journey as if, you know, how it kind of runs through an operations department.
But who do you hire to do the initial evaluation? Is that the PE, or is that your managing agent who has some department that might be knowledgeable in this area?
You would want to hire an engineer. A PE would be perfect. They would have the perfect understanding of the concepts, you know, and any kind of energy engineers. There are energy licenses out there you could also look up, but a PE is, you know, vouched for by the state. You would know a management person would be your liaison between, you know, he can keep you in, put you in touch, but directly you would want to talk to an engineer. An engineer would also be the one directly speaking to your board owners, board members, because first-hand knowledge of existing problems, existing you know, issues in a building, it's always best that that exchange happens from the source to the person who's going to be helping you.
What does a firm like yours do, and where do you sit in this process?
We are the engineers in that said conversation. We would come in, we would evaluate your buildings. We also operate in a third-party capacity when it comes to local law compliance. However, you know, whenever we do that, we always are working for the building owner, in a sense, in a position of protecting them from the city. However, we are independent third-party energy auditors, energy engineers, we have PEs. The position we play is we do not sell a thing. We are consultants. We do come in, we give you recommendations. We can tie you in with vendors for specific measures that you'd like to overtake. We also work in a project management capacity, you know, right from the beginning of the project proposal to the end where, you know, you're commissioning and start off the equipment. We can also help you with incentives and rebates. But yes, throughout the process, we kind of hold your hand. We do not go into your building with ladders. We do not sell things, but we are engineers, consulting engineers. We will do the filing when the time comes. And right now we help you evaluate your building and come up with the best tiered approaches that could help you save energy in your building. And for each of those, of course, these are engineering studies. You know, we kind of tell you how much it would roughly cost in today's market, what incentives are out there, what your payback is, what your return on investment is, how much it would reduce your emissions by, and how much it would reduce your potential fines by. So all of that information, and of course, throughout the project implementation step, all of that is verified, because it doesn't mean anything if it's not actually happening in reality.
Does the reduction in emission result in cost savings to a building, or is it just a additional cost in adding new equipment to the buildings?
Well, it's a few different layers there. If you are implementing new equipment, there is, of course, that initial cost, that huge initial startup cost that can almost never be overcome in the first year through energy savings. If you are reducing emissions, in a way, you are reducing energy consumption, which means you're using less energy. So yes, you are saving energy, but did you implement a lot of investment cost to save that energy? So then it's a question of the trade-off. Like, so some buildings, for example, if we see their annual fines are $10,000 and they have 100 units, sometimes they just want to pay off $100 a year or $10 a year instead of investing in a new boiler. So that is the key, again, trying to understanding that trade-off where it starts to make sense an investment. Again, it depends where you are today, and that would dictate the kind of approaches we would take, depending on if you are way below the limit. We would try to do what's called a retrocommissioning study. It's a low to no cost fixes. We would recommend making sure you have insulation, your lighting is upgraded, weather stripping. These are things that the local law 87 also takes care of. If you're in the middle up there, almost close to the limit, there are more cost-intensive measures that we would like to explore for a building. Things like BMS upgrades, more like controls, more intrusive to tenants, things like that, because sometimes those are the key problem areas. And then, of course, there's the big ticket buildings, which are already facing violations. They probably have data centers or probably laundromats, retail units that have been using and dumping energy. For those buildings, we like to take a more systematic approach where we use computer-generated simulations, energy modeling, we call them, to try and simulate what best equipment would get them that reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And all of that before they even invest in the equipment.
Jimmy, I know you said that at the beginning that it isn't exactly known what the goalpost, where the goalposts are right now, or how you get, or what the path to the goalposts are. But can you give us any rough idea of how long it takes and how far away, how is this something that has to start immediately in order to get it done by, what's the date? May of 2024? Is that the date?
No, May of 2025.
2025.
2025. But the first filing is of your, it's the prior year reporting. So really January of 2024. If your building needs a major overhaul, you're already late to the game. And it's challenging. Economy's challenging. Things are very challenging. How do whether you're a co-op, whether you're a condo, whether whether the funds are there, right? And how do you really spend the money to protect? So I think at this stage of the game, it's important to know that everything, I was kind of reading through a couple of questions in there as Neil was talking, and I wanted to make sure, hopefully maybe there was a question or something that you missed. So everything that we're really talking about here with local law 97 is important for everyone. And 25,000 square feet, that plateau. So if your building's underneath, you don't have to worry about it. Let's suppose you're involved with somehow HDFC and different types of affordable housing things. There are alternative compliance paths that can be taken as long as you demonstrate all of these measures were completed, and as professionals we could sign off on it and kind of create that roadmap. Maybe it could kind of be a one-time, over and done filing and kind of get 97 out of your life for forever.
This is for subsidized units?
Well,
yes, this is for affordable housing, and depending on if you're rent regulated units, or if you're a Michelama, or if you have or if you're an HDFC co-op, there are alternative compliance pathways you can take. So you don't need to meet those thresholds. For example, if you're rent regulated units, more than 65% units, or if you're an HDFC, you just file a one-time report by 2025 showing that you have implemented 13 prescriptive measures that are given by the law itself. But you need a registered design professional to sign off and verify that to the best of your efforts, you have implemented the 13 prescriptive measures. And once that's accepted, you're in compliance. You don't have to worry about another thing. So that's the law so far, unless it changes.
Yeah.
We have a number of questions about how commercial space in the building affects the energy goals.
So I think I saw that question in there, and there was something else about some energy grades. So I think that what is important, everyone has to understand everything within the property line, whatever's in there, everything, yes, commercial, you got commercial tenants on the ground floor. There's ways to measure and to indicate. You got all residential apartments above and how it's established. So this is whole entire, everything that comes in on the meter side is dealing with local law 97. No one's excluded from that, okay? That's an important message that I want to say. Did you want to repeat that last question? I'm not sure if I covered it.
The question is, if you have, which is typical in many co-op buildings, you have retail on the ground floor, and then maybe some buildings have some office space above that. And then you have, 20 stories of apartments if you're a larger building. How do those additional types of uses affect the overall thresholds that you have to achieve?
Well, thanks to the recent change, now when you benchmark your building, you're accounting for all of those spaces. So when it comes to calculating what your emission threshold, your limit should be, we are taking in all of those spaces into consideration. So if 25% of it is retail, 25% is office, we are attributing office thresholds, office limits to that space, and you get your own unique emissions. But what we do see is for buildings with mixed use property is the inability to pinpoint where the majority of the energy, the excess energy or the wastage is coming from. So in buildings like these, once you have information, like once you can pinpoint, and of course the easiest way is sub-metering these spaces. So you know who's using what energy. If 25,000 square feet of office space, if this is their limit and if they're using this much more, which is contributing to the whole building overall increase in GHG, then you know that it's really the commercial space that's responsible.
What is GAG?
Greenhouse gas.
Greenhouse gas.
Carbon.
Sorry,
Yeah.
not up on the acronyms.
And, as I was saying earlier, Yale, looking at these laws and these compliances are, it's an investment, because you're going to pay someone X amount of dollars to perform, let's say, a benchmark to avoid $2,000 in annual fines. The energy grade that we talked about earlier, local law 95, that comes out in October, that's a $1,250 fine. So if so automatically, if you don't comply with those, you're looking at $3,250 a year. Now, it's highly, in the past, before local law 97, whatever you did, that's all well and great. Those times are gone. You need, as we kept using a word earlier way early in the journey about accuracy and utilizing the tools and the information, because right now, if we looked at it, there's about 20% of the buildings that are that are over the threshold, and 80% of them are clear. And after this first tranche, the first bracket, that's going to flip. So some people have time, some people have alternative measures, some people just need to make sure their information is all accurate. Even if your building is a 12 and Energy Star score and it's a D, it's important to know maybe it's accurate, maybe it's really a 75. You don't know. Also, I just want to touch base on something that's important. In preparing for these, for local law 97, right? It has to be that you're involved some way, shape. I know there's some board people on the phone, maybe where you're a president or you're a manager, and the management. For the most part, all of these tools are kind of in place, but you just don't know where about getting them. So, and asking questions and understanding how you guys have performed in the past will be a good indicator of where you can possibly go. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense.
There's a question that is kind of not exactly on point, but I think enough people are asking, how do you deal with landmark buildings where there are severe restrictions on what you can do to the envelope?
Well, then again, so envelope meaning cavity, four walls, and the roof. and fenestration. So architecturally and boards, that stuff is always, I'm sure, going to exceed local law 97. You know, I don't know.
Window
Maybe
replacement.
there's some latest updates with the laws and what, you know, it's very intricate. It's questions and stuff really, or the experience then again of filing the process. So in the shortcoming, I'm sure we'll have some answers about landmark type of properties and whether.
So, yeah, so back in spring 2021, there was a provision for adjustment of buildings on a case-by-case basis. For example, if you already were using buildings, if you were already using energy that was way above the 2024 threshold, you could make an appeal to the city. You know, you would have to do an engineering study. This was back in 2021. Right now, if buildings that are you know, historical landmarks, and if they are already above the limit and they feel like they should receive an exemption, the DOB will still consider it, but it'll be a case-by-case basis. It'll be an email and then it'll be a conversation.
Oh, interesting.
But that's at this, because the law does not explicitly state any kind of deductions or exemptions for landmark buildings yet.
But if there's a particular problem in complying,
Then we can reach out to the DOB on behalf of the building owner, specific to that building, you know, making our case. What is so specific about the building that it's so special? But usually they adjust it. There have been a few buildings that have received adjustments in the past. I'm not aware if they are historical landmarks, but these were mostly buildings with data centers and medical facilities.
what resources are available to owners, managers, to help either guide them through the process or show them what financing might be available to accomplish certain goals?
So the city has released the website, of course, that I mentioned earlier, NYC Sustainability. It's a pretty big website, and it is a little bit spread out. There are bits and pieces of information on the DOB website itself.
What is the URL for that?
I'm sorry?
What is the URL for that?
I can actually share it with you guys, but it's LL97 NYC Sustainable Buildings. And it's the first link that shows up when you
NYC?
NYC, yes, nyc.gov /sustainable buildings. It should be a .gov. But then I guess the biggest you could use is the NYC Accelerator. It's a body, it's a unbiased body that's governed by the Mayor's Office of Sustainability.
And you can put your address in there and actually see what the current usage that's been recorded is at the accelerator is.
Yes, that is the Building Energy Exchange calculator. Yes, you put in your usage. It tells you what your emission limit should be. It's very similar to the report that we shared earlier, only that we kind of take it a step further. We show the projections, how bad it could get, because we kind of account for the fact that energy use is not linear. You know, it changes every year, depending on variations in operations, occupancy, and equipment use. But that calculator does give you a good idea, a starting pad of where you are today, what your violations could be.
And that's at accelerator.nyc, I think.
Yes, accelerator.nyc is the city's group of account executives where they bring you in touch with other service providers like us. But the calculator is actually Building Energy Exchange Calculator. If you just Google that again, Building Energy Exchange Calculator, it's a free tool. We also do that.
We're kind of running out of time, but there's one more question here that I think you should address, and that's how does the individual tenants' appliances that they're using within their homes affect the scoring of the building?
So depends on the appliance, but most of those in residential places, those go under plug loads, like we like to call them. And from what we see, they're pretty minimal, unless you're running high intensive data centers or IT equipment, you know, TVs, kettles, microwaves, computers, laptops, chargers. They're pretty minimal and do not contribute to most of the overall buildings.
So in the 4 minutes we have left, Jimmy, maybe you both want to make some sort of closing remarks.
Well, I'll start by saying the greatest investment that building owners could make is investing in energy efficiency. And, when someone says, well, I'm going to try, especially in commercial spaces, I'm not sure how many commercial people we have here, but, hey, Jimmy, I'm going to change my lights and I'm going to save 90%. I'm going all LED and all this good stuff. And I'm like, it took you that long to figure it out. But, today's challenge is minimal capital expenditure with maximum decarbonization. Invest your money on mitigating wasted energy. Find out where your energy is being consumed, go tackle that and get that first. And if you think of it, and if you just focus on 20% of that, you'll get an 80% efficiency in a return. So pinpoint wasted energy, dive into it, challenge it, don't be afraid of it, and basically reap the rewards. When the rewards come in, don't take them, reinvest them into the next step, because these tranches are becoming more stringent and more stringent. I hope that was good.
Neil?
Yeah, I think Jimmy pretty much covered it. I would just like to add, information is key. So knowing about your building, knowing where you stand today, what your limit is I think half the battle won. If you know where you are today, where you need to be, that itself is a big step. You're halfway there. And then it's just a matter of conversation within your building owners and understanding who's using what and moving forward.
Well, thank you, Jimmy, and thank you, Neil, for coming and discussing this. It's a big topic.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Jill.
I'm sure that it really needs to be discussed on an individual basis, building by building, for all building owners. So I look forward to continuing this dialogue in the future.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, everyone who's attended.
Thank you.
This concludes today's discussion. Thank you all again for joining us. We hope you found it interesting and informative. Watch your email in the coming days for a link to today's recording, as well as contact information for our panelists. This webinar will also be available to stream on demand at cooperatorevents.com. Please feel free to share it and follow us on social media to stay informed about future events.